Morgan Freeman said there's one sin God can never forgive, and when he revealed what it was, it left an entire room of people in complete silence, many of them crying. I know how that sounds coming from an actor who's played God in movies, but this wasn't acting. This was real life, and what he said that day shattered everything I thought I knew about forgiveness, redemption, and the human soul. I was there in that room when it happened, and I'll never forget the way his voice dropped to almost a whisper when he spoke those words that would haunt everyone who heard them. You see, we all think we know about unforgivable sins. Murder, betrayal, blasphemy against the divine. But Morgan Freeman, with that voice that seems to carry the weight of eternity itself, revealed something so much deeper, so much more personal, that it cuts right to the core of why so many of us feel lost, broken, and disconnected from any sense of peace or purpose. The sin he spoke about isn't something you do to others. It's something you do to yourself, and once you understand what it is, you'll realize why it's the one barrier that even divine love struggles to overcome. I've been carrying his words with me for weeks now, and I need to share them with you because what Morgan Freeman revealed that day doesn't just explain why some people never find peace no matter how much they pray, how much they try to be good, or how desperately they seek forgiveness. It explains why you might be stuck in patterns of guilt and shame that feel impossible to break, why you might feel unworthy of love no matter what anyone tells you, and why the voice in your head that condemns you never seems to quiet down no matter how many people tell you that you're forgiven. But here's what's going to shock you even more. When Morgan Freeman explained exactly what this unforgivable sin is and why it's different from every other sin you've ever heard about, he didn't just leave people crying because it was devastating. He left them crying because for the first time in their lives, they finally understood why they'd been trapped, and more importantly, he showed them the one key that could set them free. And if you stay with me through this story, you're going to discover not just what this sin is, but the revolutionary way to overcome it that will change how you see yourself forever. It was during a small, intimate gathering at a charity event in Los Angeles. Morgan Freeman wasn't there as an actor or celebrity. He was there as a human being who had lived through decades of triumph, failure, heartbreak, and wisdom. The room was filled with maybe 40 people, survivors of tragedy, people who had lost everything, individuals carrying burdens so heavy you could see it in their posture, the way they held their shoulders, the guarded look in their eyes. These weren't people looking for entertainment. They were people looking for answers. I remember the exact moment everything shifted. Freeman had been speaking softly about resilience, about the human capacity to endure, when a woman in the front row broke down sobbing. She said through her tears, "Mr. Freeman, I've done terrible things. I've hurt people I love. I've prayed every night for forgiveness, I've tried to make amends, but I can't find peace. What if God can't forgive me? What if I've gone too far?" The room fell silent. You could feel the collective breath being held because her question wasn't just hers. It was everyone's question, the question that haunts anyone who's ever made a mistake they couldn't take back. That's when Morgan Freeman's expression changed. His eyes, which usually twinkle with warmth and wisdom, became serious, almost grave. He leaned forward in his chair, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before, not even in his most powerful movie roles. "My dear," he said, "God can forgive anything. Anything at all. Murder, betrayal, cruelty, abandonment, every sin you've ever committed or ever could commit. But there is one sin that even divine love cannot penetrate, one barrier that even infinite forgiveness cannot cross." The woman stopped crying. Everyone stopped breathing. The silence in that room was so complete you could hear hearts beating. And then Freeman said the words that would change everything. "The one sin God cannot forgive is the sin you refuse to let him forgive. The one sin that blocks all grace, all mercy, all love from reaching you." He paused, letting those words sink in before continuing, "It's not the terrible things you've done. It's your refusal to let them go. It's your insistence on punishing yourself for sins that have already been washed clean." I watched as the truth of his words hit the room like a physical force. People began to understand something profound, something that would unravel everything they thought they knew about forgiveness, about worthiness, about the very nature of divine love. But what Freeman said next about why we do this to ourselves, why we choose to remain prisoners of our own guilt, was going to reveal the most shocking truth about human nature that would leave everyone questioning everything they'd ever believed about redemption. Morgan Freeman stood up slowly, his presence filling the room in a way that made everyone lean forward unconsciously. "Let me tell you something about human nature that will disturb you," he said, his voice carrying that unmistakable authority that comes from decades of observing life's deepest truths. "We have convinced ourselves that suffering is noble. We have made pain our proof of love, guilt our badge of honor, and self-punishment our twisted form of righteousness." He walked to the center of the room, and I could see people hanging on his every word. "Think about it," he continued. "When someone hurts us, we eventually find a way to forgive them. We understand that they're human, that they made a mistake, that they deserve compassion. But when we hurt someone else, when we fail, when we fall short of our own expectations, we become our own harshest judge, our own cruelest prosecutor, our own most merciless executioner." The woman who had been crying earlier raised her hand tentatively. "But Mr. Freeman, shouldn't we feel guilty when we do wrong? Isn't that how we learn?" His smile was both gentle and sad. "Guilt is meant to be a teacher, not a prison warden," he replied. "Guilt says, I made a mistake and I need to do better. Shame says, I am a mistake and I deserve to suffer." Guilt motivates change. Shame paralyzes growth. Freeman paused, letting his eyes sweep across the room, meeting the gaze of person after person. "Here's what's truly heartbreaking," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Many of you sitting here tonight have spent years, maybe decades, asking God for forgiveness for things He forgave the moment you asked. But you keep dragging those sins back up, polishing them, rehearsing them, wearing them like chains because somewhere deep inside, you believe that your suffering somehow honors the people you've hurt or makes up for the damage you've done." I watched as recognition dawned on face after face around the room. People were nodding, some crying again, others just staring in stunned realization. Freeman wasn't finished. "The tragedy is this. While you're busy punishing yourself for past mistakes, you're committing a new sin every single day. You're refusing the gift of grace. You're telling the Creator of the universe that His forgiveness isn't good enough, that your self-hatred is more powerful than His love, that your judgment is more accurate than His mercy." The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Then Freeman delivered the words that would shatter every remaining wall of self-deception. "The reason this is the unforgivable sin isn't because God won't forgive it. It's because when you refuse to forgive yourself, you make it impossible for forgiveness to reach you. You build a wall so thick that even infinite love cannot penetrate it. You become unreachable, not because you're too far gone, but because you won't open the door." But what he revealed next about the real reason we cling to our guilt, about the hidden pride that keeps us trapped in cycles of self-punishment, was going to expose the most shocking truth about why good people often struggle the most with accepting forgiveness, and why the very thing we think makes us humble actually makes us unreachable by grace. Morgan Freeman's next words cut through the room like a sword through silk. "The people who struggle most with self-forgiveness aren't the ones you'd expect," he said, his eyes scanning the faces before him. "It's not the hardened criminals or the obviously broken. It's the good people. The ones who've spent their lives trying to do right, trying to be better, trying to live up to impossible standards they've set for themselves." He moved closer to the woman who had originally asked the question, his voice becoming more intimate, more personal. "You see, when someone who's always been bad makes a mistake, they forgive themselves easily because it fits their self-image. But when someone who prides themselves on being good fails, they can't reconcile it. They can't accept that they're capable of causing real damage, real pain. So instead of accepting their humanity, they cling to their guilt like a security blanket." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing themselves in his words. Freeman wasn't done peeling back the layers of self-deception. "Here's the hidden pride I'm talking about," he continued, his voice gaining intensity. "Deep down, many of you believe you're better than other people. Not consciously, not in a way you'd ever admit, but unconsciously. You hold yourself to standards you'd never hold others to because you've built your identity around being the exception, the one who doesn't mess up, the one who always does the right thing." A man in the back row called out, "But isn't that a good thing?" Shouldn't we hold ourselves to high standards? Freeman turned toward him, and his smile was knowing, almost sad. High standards, yes. Impossible standards that deny your humanity? That's not righteousness, my friend. That's pride dressed up as virtue. Freeman walked back to the center of the room, and when he spoke again, his words carried the weight of decades of observation and wisdom. When you refuse to forgive yourself, you're essentially saying one of two things. Either you're saying that your sin is so special, so uniquely terrible, that it's beyond the reach of divine grace. Or you're saying that your suffering somehow adds value to the universe, that your self-punishment serves some cosmic purpose that mercy cannot achieve. The room erupted in quiet murmurs as people began to grasp the magnitude of what he was revealing. Both positions, Freeman continued, are forms of pride. The first makes you the exception to God's love. The second makes you the co-author of justice. Both place you at the center of the story in a way that actually separates you from the very grace you claim to seek. I watched as a middle-aged man in the third row suddenly put his head in his hands and began to weep. He understood. They all understood. Freeman had just exposed the most hidden, most protected part of the human ego, the part that would rather suffer than surrender, rather be special in its pain than ordinary in its need for grace. This is why, Freeman said, his voice becoming gentler now, the most religious people, the most moral people, the most conscientious people often struggle the most with inner peace. They've made their goodness their God, and when they fall short of their own standards, they cannot accept the forgiveness that's freely offered because accepting it would mean admitting they were never as special as they thought they were. But what Freeman revealed next about how to break free from this prison of pride, about the one simple shift in perspective that could shatter decades of self-imposed suffering, was going to give everyone in that room the key they'd been searching for their entire lives, and it was simpler and more radical than anyone could have imagined. Morgan Freeman looked around the room one more time, his gaze settling on each person as if he could see straight into their souls. "The shift I'm about to share with you," he said, his voice taking on an almost sacred quality, "will sound so simple that your mind will want to reject it. But its simplicity is its power, and its power will set you free if you let it." He sat back down in his chair, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. "Stop trying to be worthy of forgiveness," he said, and the words hung in the air like a revelation. "Stop trying to earn what has already been given. Stop trying to prove you deserve love through your suffering. The moment you accept that forgiveness isn't about worthiness, it's about grace, everything changes." A young woman near the front raised her hand tentatively. "But Mr. Freeman, how do I know I'm truly sorry if I don't feel the pain of what I've done?" His response was immediate and gentle. "My dear, sorrow and self-torture are not the same thing. You can acknowledge the harm you've caused, you can feel genuine remorse, you can commit to doing better, all without sentencing yourself to a lifetime of emotional prison." Freeman stood again, but this time his movements were different, lighter somehow. "Here's what I want you to try," he said, his voice filled with a warmth that seemed to embrace everyone in the room. "Tonight, when you go home, I want you to speak to yourself the way you would speak to your own child who had made a mistake. Not the way your critical parent spoke to you, not the way your guilt speaks to you, but the way a loving parent speaks to a child they adore unconditionally." I watched as people began to sit up straighter, something shifting in their posture, their expressions. Freeman continued, "When your child spills milk, you don't say, 'You're a terrible person who deserves to suffer for what you've done.' You say, 'It's okay, accidents happen, let's clean it up together.' When your child tells a lie, you don't say, 'You're unforgivable and should carry this shame forever.' You say, 'Thank you for telling me the truth now. Let's talk about why lying hurts people and how we can do better.'" The room was electric with understanding. People were nodding, some crying, others just staring in amazement as decades of self-hatred began to crack under the weight of this simple truth. "The revolutionary shift," Freeman said, his voice gaining power, "is this: treat yourself like someone you love instead of someone you're trying to punish." He walked over to the woman who had first asked the question and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "You've been carrying guilt about things that happened years ago, haven't you?" She nodded through fresh tears. "And in all those years of self-punishment, has it helped anyone?" Has your suffering brought back what was lost? Has your guilt healed the people you hurt? Has your shame made the world a better place? She shook her head slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Then what if, Freeman said softly, what if your healing, your peace, your joy could actually honor those you've hurt more than your suffering ever could? What if living freely and lovingly and joyfully, while carrying the wisdom of your mistakes, could be your gift to a world that desperately needs people who understand both failure and grace? The transformation in the room was palpable. People were sitting differently, breathing differently, looking at each other and themselves with new eyes. Freeman returned to the center of the room for his final revelation. The unforgivable sin isn't unforgivable because God won't forgive it. It's unforgivable because when you refuse to forgive yourself, you block the very channel through which all forgiveness flows. But the moment you open that channel, the moment you treat yourself with the same compassion you'd show a beloved friend, everything that was waiting to pour into your life suddenly has a way in. But what Morgan Freeman said next about what happens when you finally make this shift, about the miraculous transformation that occurs not just in your own life but in the lives of everyone around you, was going to reveal the ultimate purpose behind every moment of pain, every lesson learned through failure, and why your mistakes might actually be the greatest gift you could ever offer to a broken world. Morgan Freeman's eyes lit up with something I can only describe as pure joy as he prepared to share what he called the most beautiful secret of human existence. He moved to the window of the room, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the darkness. When you finally forgive yourself, he said, his voice filled with wonder, something miraculous happens that goes far beyond your own healing. You become a bridge between heaven and earth, a living demonstration of grace in action. He turned back to face the room, and I could see that everyone was completely captivated. You see, people can argue with theology all day long. They can debate scriptures, challenge doctrines, question beliefs. But they cannot argue with transformation. They cannot debate a life that has been genuinely changed. When you walk in forgiveness, truly forgive yourself and live from that place of grace, you become proof that redemption is real. A man in the corner called out, "Can you give us an example?" Freeman smiled, that warm, knowing smile that seemed to contain decades of stories. "I'll give you 3, he said. There was a woman I knew who had been carrying guilt for 20 years about a car accident that wasn't even her fault. But she survived when others didn't, and she couldn't forgive herself for living. For 2 decades, she punished herself by living small, by refusing joy, by turning down opportunities." Freeman paused, letting the weight of that story settle. Then one day, she had a moment of clarity. She realized that her survival wasn't something to feel guilty about, it was something to be grateful for. She wasn't alive by accident. She was alive on purpose. The moment she forgave herself for surviving, she began to live. Really live. She started a foundation that has now saved hundreds of lives. Her guilt kept her small. Her forgiveness made her mighty. The room was silent except for the sound of people breathing, really breathing, maybe for the first time in years. Freeman continued, "Then there was a man who embezzled money from his company during a dark period in his life. He paid it back, served his time, but couldn't move past the shame. He saw himself as a thief, as someone who couldn't be trusted. That identity kept him trapped in minimum wage jobs, unable to use his considerable talents." Freeman's voice grew more animated. But when he finally forgave himself, when he stopped defining himself by his worst moment and started seeing himself as someone who had learned profound lessons about integrity, everything shifted. He became a financial counselor who specialized in helping people avoid the mistakes he had made. His past became his credential, his failure became his qualification. The very thing he was most ashamed of became the foundation of his purpose. I watched as people began to lean forward, hope beginning to replace despair in their eyes. Freeman wasn't finished. "And then there's the story that will break your heart open in the most beautiful way," he said, his voice becoming tender. "A mother who lost her child due to what she believed was her negligence. For years, she couldn't forgive herself. She became a ghost in her own life, unable to connect with her husband, her friends, anyone. She felt like she didn't deserve happiness, didn't deserve love, didn't deserve to live. Tears were flowing freely throughout the room now. Freeman's voice remained steady but gentle. The breakthrough came when she realized that her child wouldn't want her to live in perpetual anguish. Her child would want her to heal, to love, to find joy again. When she forgave herself, she didn't dishonor her child's memory. She honored it by choosing to live fully, to love deeply, to be present for others who were struggling with loss. Freeman returned to the center of the room, his presence seeming to fill every corner. In each of these cases, self-forgiveness didn't just heal the person. It created a ripple effect that touched hundreds, sometimes thousands of other lives. The woman who survived became a lifesaver. The man who stole became a teacher of integrity. The mother who lost became a source of comfort for others in grief. He looked directly at each person as he spoke these final words. This is why your mistakes, your failures, your deepest regrets might actually be your greatest gifts to the world. Not because the pain was good, but because the healing that comes from forgiveness creates a depth of compassion, a quality of wisdom, a capacity for love that can only come from someone who has been broken and learned how to become whole again. The energy in the room was electric. People were not just crying now, they were laughing through their tears, embracing each other, looking at their own lives with completely new eyes. But what Morgan Freeman revealed in his closing words about the one simple practice that could maintain this transformation, about how to keep living from forgiveness instead of falling back into old patterns of self-condemnation, was going to give everyone the practical tool they needed to make this shift permanent and life-changing. Morgan Freeman looked around the transformed room one final time, his eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of a teacher who had just watched his students grasp the most important lesson of their lives. "Before I leave you tonight," he said, his voice carrying both the weight of wisdom and the lightness of hope, "I want to give you something practical, something you can use every single day to stay in this place of grace we've discovered together." He sat down in his chair for the last time that evening, leaning forward with the intimacy of a grandfather sharing a cherished family secret. Every morning when you wake up, before you check your phone, before you think about your problems, before you remember all the reasons you should feel guilty or ashamed, I want you to place your hand on your heart and say these words: "Good morning, beloved. I see you. I accept you. I forgive you. Today we begin again." The simplicity of it caused a ripple of something that felt like relief mixed with amazement throughout the room. Freeman smiled at their reaction. "It sounds too simple, doesn't it? But here's what I've learned in my decades on this earth. The most powerful truths are always simple. Complex problems don't require complex solutions. They require consistent application of simple truths." A woman near the back raised her hand. "But Mr. Freeman, what if I don't feel it at first? What if it feels like I'm lying to myself?" His response was immediate and compassionate. "My dear, feelings follow actions, not the other way around. You don't wait to feel forgiving before you forgive. You forgive, and then the feeling catches up. You speak love to yourself until love becomes your natural language." Freeman stood for his final words, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to carry the authority of someone who had not just observed these truths but lived them. The practice is this simple: treat yourself like your own best friend instead of your own worst enemy. When you make a mistake, ask yourself, what would I say to someone I love who had done this? Then say that to yourself. When you're struggling, ask yourself, how would I comfort someone I care about who was going through this? Then offer that comfort to yourself. I watched as people throughout the room began nodding, some already practicing this new way of speaking to themselves. Freeman continued, "And here's the most important part. When you catch yourself falling back into old patterns of self-condemnation, don't condemn yourself for condemning yourself. Simply notice it, smile gently at your humanity, and choose again. The practice isn't about perfection. It's about direction." Freeman moved toward the door, but turned back one more time, his presence filling the room with warmth and possibility. "Remember, the unforgivable sin is only unforgivable as long as you keep the door of your heart locked from the inside. But you hold the key. You've always held the key. Tonight, you've learned how to use it." He paused at the threshold, his final words carrying the weight of a benediction. "Go home tonight and look in the mirror. Look into your own eyes and say, I forgive you. I love you. You are worthy of every good thing life has to offer." Say it until you believe it. Say it until it becomes your truth. Because it already is your truth. You're just remembering what you temporarily forgot. As Morgan Freeman left that room, something fundamental had shifted in every person present. We weren't just inspired, we were transformed. We had discovered that the prison we thought God had locked us in was actually one we had locked ourselves in, and we had been holding the key all along. The unforgivable sin wasn't unforgivable because it was too great for divine love. It was unforgivable because we had made ourselves unreachable by that love through our own self-condemnation. But now we knew better. Now we knew that forgiveness isn't something we earn, it's something we accept. Love isn't something we become worthy of, it's something we are. And peace isn't something we achieve through suffering, it's something we receive through grace. Morgan Freeman had given us more than wisdom that night. He had given us our lives back. And if his words can transform a room full of broken people into a room full of healed souls, imagine what they could do for you if you let them into your heart and made them your daily practice. The question isn't whether you deserve forgiveness. The question is whether you're finally ready to unlock the door you've been guarding so carefully and step into the freedom that's been waiting for you all along. Your move.